The new economies, circular economy, the economy for the common good, the Green New Deal, sharing economy, economies for happiness. So many words out there. Have you ever wondered what they all mean? So before talking about them, maybe we should clear up, why should you even think about them? Why should I bother? Well, regulations are changing a lot at the moment. Now we have COVID going on, okay, that's a big thing and we have to go through this. But then after that, we have to ask our questions. How can we become a healthier and better society? And how can companies and organizations contribute to that? Maybe even we ask ourselves, me as a consumer, what is my part in the story? What can I do about it? So there's new techniques and methods out there that we can learn. We can learn different new concepts to manage companies differently, to look at ourselves in a different way, to enable ourselves maybe to learn about our emotions, to learn how to deal with sustainable issues, how to manage our footprint, and all these kind of issues that we have to face. So, what do you think? Why don't we take it to the classroom and we look at it from there? Hi, and welcome to the classroom again. Today we actually have the first lecture, first episode of a new series called Let's Create Impact. This is number 1. Like I mentioned earlier, there's so many terms around, so many new things to learn when we talk about the new economies, sustainable business, ethical business. So many things that we have to learn. But before we actually do that, I think it's worth looking at the big why. Why do we actually need to talk about sustainability, healthy companies, ethical companies, new economies, new tools, measuring impact, creating impact? So let's do it. Let's have a look. What's on the topic? So today we will talk about the big why, like I mentioned earlier. So we will talk about global challenges and we will talk about opportunities. But before leaving, I would like to give you some next steps and a little outlook on how the series is going to continue. So let's start with the global challenges. Many of those will not be new for you, but it's good to recap some main issues that we have to deal with. Here actually we see the global overshoot graph from 2020, last year's global overshoot. So what is this global overshoot day? As you can see on the slide, we see the globe, and on the globe there's all the countries of the world depicted with the date. And we look, for example, at the United States and it puts March. So this date actually indicates us when this economy has used up all the resources that they would have normally produced sustainably on their own. Meaning, when we're already in March and we reached overshoot day, means every further day we're living in debt. We are using more than we could produce on our own. This is the overshoot. And we see here also a big picture of social injustice, if you want to say so, because we see all the industrialized countries are really early in the year reaching their global overshoot day, and we look at developing countries and they maybe reach it quite late in the year. This also shows some kind of injustice. Why? Because the industrialized world uses up their resources so quickly, and all the other countries, they use much less resources. So this is also based on a global accounting method, taking in consideration all the land that is available, what is our footprint in water and land use, etc. And then calculating also what would be a just measure for each human being. When we think of these kind of things, we take into consideration our footprint, how much energy is used, how many resources are used for the service or the good that I'm consuming. We really have to look at the justice part too. How can I justify, for example, me flying somewhere, knowing that by that, for example, I would use up my whole credits for 1 year, taking into consideration the whole world population. So this is one thing to definitely have in mind, and ideally we would like the global overshoot day to be next year, not this year. Ideally, we would create savings. No? We look at this animated graphic and we see the average temperature depicted starting in the 19th century basically to now. And we see the red line on the outside depicts 2 degrees Celsius, which is also one of the political objectives, to not let world average temperature rise above 2 degrees Celsius. And we see that last years we have been pretty close to the 2 degrees, and this is why the alarm bells are ringing. We need to already start acting, and if you want to say so, fight the war on climate. But I don't really like the word fighting, so we would rather say let's create a regenerative society, zero net emissions, or ideally even capturing CO2. Now we will go through a couple of pictures, and before giving you the answer what this picture stands for, I would like you to look at it for a little moment and let it influence you, or let it sit for a while, and you feel what kind of emotions causes it and what kind of terms do you associate with this picture. So looking at the first picture, we see a plastic cup in the ocean. So we're talking about the planet plastic. There's actually an interesting documentary movie with the same name, Plastic Planet. For those that don't know it, I recommend watching it. It is, of course, a little bit depressing seeing how much plastic is in the world. And there's already studies showing that there's microplastics in little babies. So this goes into the food chain, as you can imagine. You know, plastics, they don't degrade really, they don't decompose. They only get smaller and smaller and smaller, create so-called microparticles, which we then call the microplastics. And the ocean is an outstanding example for the problem of microplastics. And when you look at Google Trends, for example, is one of the most concerning topic in the next centuries. Now, what people, despite maybe COVID and other topics, microplastics is one of the topics that people are really worried about, because it goes into the food chain and it can cause all kinds of pathologies that we don't even know about yet, apart from being toxic and killing habitat and even going into the food chain of the animals. So it's a serious problem. Looking at the next picture, you might have a similar kind of association that doesn't make you too happy looking at it. But again, we need to face reality, and I will just give you a couple of slides first that are a little bit shocking, but to raise a bit of awareness and make us aware of what we are facing. So here we see a factory, and we see lots of chimneys with dirt coming out, smoke, and even water in front, so maybe even pollution goes into a river. So here we talk about the problem of greenhouse gas emissions and pollution in all kinds of forms. So this is a big problem. We talk about climate change. We don't know exactly what will happen when the temperature rises. How is this affecting our ecosystem? Imagine yourself, you are an ecosystem. So when your body temperature rises by 1%, you feel sick. But 1% maybe, or 1 degree maybe, is not making you really feeling like, oh, I have to lay down in the bed and I can't move anymore. But let it raise 2 to 3 degrees. You maybe want to go to the hospital already, or you feel paralyzed. So little temperature changes, they might seem insignificant on a global scale, but on a micro scale, they might be quite worrisome. So the greenhouse gas effect and greenhouse gas emissions are a big problem. We are aware of the climate change, and not just Fridays for Future brought it back on the political agenda. It's, beside COVID, the topic of this millennia. Looking at the next picture, we associate mining, resource extraction, production, heavy industry, maybe also pollution. Here we also want to mention the resource overconsumption and the problems associated with it. So even if we talk about sustainable alternatives maybe to normal cars, when we talk about electric mobility, we still need to ask, how are the batteries produced, or how is the whole life cycle of this vehicle. No, many resources go into it, and we want to create new cars now. So where are all those materials coming from to really nourish our consumerism? Yeah, and even when we talk about technology and so-called new sustainable solutions, we still need to ask seriously the questions, where are all the resources coming from? And you really see that some governments already highly invest to look for resources on other planets, yeah, instead of really thinking, how can we make these resources we have, or this planet's resources, more sustainable, or use less resources. No? So the idea of maybe consuming less, being more sufficient, has not come into people's minds so much. The next picture, for me personally as a permaculture designer, is always of highest concerns. Yeah, you have seen what happens when food supply gets shortened. People were really going crazy in the first months of COVID lockdown, ripping down shelves, being afraid what is going to happen. But maybe we don't even think about a much bigger problem. We are losing lots of land, yeah? And there's new deserts appearing. High usage of industrial fertilizers, for example, cause desertification of land. If we derode forests, or also industrial agriculture, comes many times with the problem of erosion. Erosion is a huge problem. Why? We use nutrients and, even worse, cultivable land. A high percentage of cultivable land worldwide has already been disappearing, meaning there's every time less land where we can grow food. That's as simple as it is. So the more we lose our soils, the less we can sustain our world population. So here we need smart solutions, for example permaculture design and regenerative agriculture design, to really bring back the soil, bring back soil to life, and really understand that soil is an ecosystem and you should never call it dirt. Yeah, this little fella is very, very characteristic for another issue that we are facing, and it's of high relevance: the loss of biodiversity. One might wonder, what does that frog has to do with me? No? And it's just a frog. What role is it playing? It's not a big deal if we lose a species of frogs, for example. You might think, but again, talking about ecosystems, and everything is related to everything. So if you take one piece out of the puzzle, maybe the whole cart house breaks down. Because then a missing link in the trophical chains maybe appears, and we don't really know what that effect might have. Even in COVID times, people many times mentioned that these kind of pandemic appearances, new viruses coming up, is highly also due to a loss of biodiversity. Cutting down primary forests, for example, you lose natural predators of pathologies, insects, etc. So keeping biodiversity conserved and doing the best to not lose more species on this planet. We're even talking about the next great extinction. Hopefully all of us watching this video will never experience what that is. Yeah. The next picture personally makes me really sad. You know? And when we talk about sustainability and the new economies, we really need to be tackling the issue of poverty and social injustice. It's not just a problem of the developed world to be more sustainable and to have a fair distribution of income and resources. It's a matter of everybody. And personally, I cannot live well knowing that other peoples are really suffering on this planet. So we all have our duty here to see that no one really and no child should go hungry to bed. Well, and that picture, I guess now everybody knows what to associate with that. Maybe 1 year ago people might have wondered, what is that strange looking planet in the universe, something new discovered? No. We talk about global health issues. Momentarily, this is the issue on the planet. It will disappear. new issues will come up. We've seen them now. They're not new. We just talk to old friends. And there's funny pictures also going on social media around where you see COVID as a shark and maybe much bigger shark behind it, which is already then climate change. So global health issues are definitely a problem because we see how the health of a person can then, on a bigger scale, affect the health of an economy. Now, we have seen what happened now during COVID. The health of the people is important for the economy, so that's why we should never forget this period of our lives, and we should learn from it and see how can we create healthier companies and organizations, and by that create a healthier society. Okay, so this might have been a little bit shocking, maybe depressing, maybe concerning. Well, it is. But let's look at the opportunities. Not everything is looking bad. To the contrary, there's actually a lot of opportunities knocking at the door. Here we see the Green New Deal, something that I've mentioned earlier already, and I'm sure we will mention it again. It's one of the topics which, especially in Europe, is on the high political agenda. As I said, before COVID, this was the topic at the beginning of 2020. Then lockdown came and people forgot about the fact that we want to create a Green Deal, which is a climate neutral continent here in Europe by 2020. There's also already people talking about a Green Deal for the United States. So this is becoming a global agenda, talking about zero emissions, talking about circular economy. And even here we see big figures of money are invested. 1.6 trillion US dollars will go into a greener and climate neutral circular economy. We have all kinds of different programs here funded by the EU, from research development, but also to CO2 compensation funds. So green bonds, even the central bank wants to become green. So this is the new hip, if you want to say so. And there's no way around it in Europe from this political agenda. You might wonder, okay, I'm not living in Europe, why should I bother? Well, imports are also going to be restricted on circular products, and if products are not contributing to a zero net society when it comes to emissions, then those products might not be able to enter the markets, and so on and so forth. It also goes into the line with foreign aid. The whole aid program of the European Union now is also aligned with the Green Deal and focuses on the Sustainable Development Goals, for example, which we are now talking about too. So the Sustainable Development Goals, the so-called SDGs, are goals around the aim of sustainability and sustainable development. We have a couple of topics, not really specifying what we have to do in this topic, but those are objectives like no poverty or climate neutral societies, or life on water, life on sea, partnerships. All kinds of topics important when it comes to creating sustainable futures and creating impact. Talking about new economies, investors are looking a lot on the SDGs. Many companies are already aligning their businesses towards SDGs. And especially small and medium companies, they have a huge potential to make benefit of these SDGs. People can understand them easily, they're comprehensive, and if you want to use them for authentic communication strategy, it's very good material and it will make your company also happier. We can also now look at what is science telling us. Why should we be sustainable and ethical and focus on the new economies from an economical point of view? Why does it benefit me, or why is it beneficial for my organization? Well, we see consumers and employees, they are changing, markets are changing. We see that new generations are coming into the workforce and are also consumers, like the so-called Generation Y or digital natives. We now also talk about the Generation Z, Greta Thunberg, for example, the now teenagers. They are highly active, they are connected, they are digital, they are emotional, and they have a high focus on sustainability, ethical criteria, and being authentic. So if a company nowadays is not sustainable anymore, people really start boycotting this company. And if you have the chance to choose your employer, many employees now say, I only want to work for companies that are in line with my values, where I feel identified, where I can grow, and where I can really see that my emotions are taken care of and I'm being treated as a peer on site. So this is something really have in mind, that we need those talents. We talk about the war for talents in science, and this means that with demographic change, talent is getting shorter and shorter, and companies are competing for the best employees. So now, if you want to attract talent, it's really beneficial to integrate sustainability values and focus on new economic models to attract talent and to make them really part of your organization. Partner up with them and change the world together, if you want to say so. No? So this is becoming really big topic. Also when we talk about future of work, new work, work-life balance, all these kind of things becoming more and more important for employees and for consumers. So this is something to be really having to look at. But not just consumers and employees, also investors are more and more focusing on the topic of sustainability. We will have new regulations, for example in Europe. Again, regulations change and non-financial indicators now become obligatory for companies bigger than 500 employees and a certain amount of revenues, so bigger companies. Yet those now have to already report on their impact. For example, a big company, for example an automotive producer, now has to calculate their carbon footprint. You might say, I'm just a small company, why bother? Well, those companies now also have to look at their suppliers and now maybe require those suppliers, which is you, to report their carbon footprint. So anyways, investors, they are really interested in SDGs, like I mentioned earlier. It's a big topic, easy to understand, and big companies are already starting to report on it, and this is what investors want to see. Besides that, there have been many scandals in the last decades about transparency, misusage of accounting techniques, being corrupt, falsifying documentation. New financial standards have been implemented. So nowadays, so-called environmental social governance, ESG, is becoming more and more interesting for investors because they want to make sure that their agents are happy. So they want to protect investors, and investors are protected if companies are working ethically and for a sustainable future. So if you want to attract investors, more and more it becomes important to create impact, to report your impact, to understand how to manage your impact, to be sustainable and to be ethical. So this is an important signaling and screening mechanism. Now if we want to, for example, have a common good balance sheet certification, by that we allow people to screen us, but we also signal our qualities to consumers, to employees, to investors. So these kind of measures will become more and more important for us as managers. Talking about management, it has been also proven that nowadays being sustainable is not a trade-off anymore to being successful. So performance is now to be seen positively affected by sustainability measures, from better cash flow to better reputation, higher resilience, better adaptations to new regulations, better rent capturing there, and also reducing supply chain risks, something we talked about in COVID a lot. On the other hand, imagine you are a supplier, so you are also more and more obligated to demonstrate your impact and to be able to manage your impact, to cooperate or to partner with companies to reduce your impact. So here, when we talk about supply chains and management, the issue of sustainability becomes more and more important. Of course, we need to talk about the effects on society and the reasons why we should be sustainable from a societal point of view. Well, we have an obligation to keep public relations, and we are part of the public, we are part of the ecosystem, so we play a role in our community, we have a responsibility. So also where I put my money is a big decision. So I could also, from a company point of view, decide to invest into my community. For example, local NGOs that create an impact, for example, provide food for children, etc. So this is an important issue. We need to be understanding ourselves as part of the ecosystem, and we cannot take us out of the responsibility of the impact we have in our local communities, in our local societies. Politics and politicians are more and more focusing also on what is my impact and what is my role. But on the other hand, also us as sustainable companies or as sustainable managers and consumers and employees, we need to start lobbying for the common good, for a sustainable future. It's in our interest to influence politics to put the right measures in place. We talk about new regulations, the Green Deal, or public procurement laws. They are changing, so-called social clausulas. Normally, when you have public money being given out to companies, they go through tenders. Those tenders have always been under scrutiny towards cost efficiency. Now they will look at corporate social responsibility or ESG performance. So how well do I perform also when it comes to impact? And even especially public institutions might more and more be prone to choose sustainable providers because they also have to fulfill certain objectives again from top down, also to comply with certain policies. So more and more public procurement is pressuring companies to become more sustainable. So if you want to be ahead of the game, you already start creating impact, measuring it and communicating it. So if you want to see a really great case how to do that, how to be sustainable, how to live it authentically, and how to create great products, how to be innovative, although you act internationally, you're a producing company, a company from Germany called faud, and a pioneering company for the Common Good economy. It's been certified in Common Good balance sheet, the Global Reporting Initiative standards has been certified, and they're part of the Fairware Foundation. So there's great material on the website, faud.de. They have English and German materials, so it's a great fundus of materials, so have a look. I can hardly say that there's much room to improve for them, although they always find ways to improve, and there's always also stuff to criticize, of course. Yet, for me it's a great case, very inspirational. I use a lot in my classes, and I can only recommend you to look at them. They have the so-called green thread, and it goes through the whole company. But is that everything? Is talking about sustainability and the new economies everything? Like learning new skills on how to measure my footprint, is that all? I would say no. My personal experience also has taught me that emotions play a great role. But I've always considered it more like a personal thing, to be able to manage my emotions, to be maybe more successful, to be happier. Yet it shows, new research, that emotions, they translate into hard facts. So if we want to implement some kind of change management, we need to be knowing what are the emotions of my employees, or how do people react emotionally. There's a great study I can only recommend you, and it proposes that emotional intelligence is really a cornerstone in new corporate governance. It's key in creating trust within organizations, and only by that organizations can be run by values towards an ethical, sustainable goal. So if we don't treat our emotions, becoming more sustainable might become a lost cause. So emotional intelligence should be a new thing companies should focus on, also talking about healthier companies. We're not just talking about physical health. We have seen in the pandemic that emotional health plays a great role. So again, the emotions translate into hard economic figures, so you might not want to miss out on that one. So what could be the next steps? Now thinking about all these topics, so what would be one of the next steps? Well, I can only invite you to stay tuned for the next episode and also to check out some of our courses from Seeds for Sustainability. The next class we'll talk about the new economies, and in order for you to stay tuned, please make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, turn on the notifications, and also I can really recommend you to have a look at our club. We have lots of benefits of joining the club, so make sure you now press the notification button here on the YouTube channel so you can stay tuned for the next video. I hope you enjoyed the class. Have fun and let's create impact.